ASBOs. They're being dished out left, right and centre, as I said, for such heinous crimes as sitting on the pavement, having an untidy garden. And one guy was actually fined for trying to fix a council fountain. So you try and do a good deed, along comes a job's worth and fines you. What is this all about? It seems to me it feeds into the fact that our freedoms are being taken away from us, not only by this unlibertarian government, but of course by the town hall tyrants. Let's talk to Paddy Hannam from Spiked Online. Hello, Paddy.
Hi, Kevin.
What do you think about this? I mean, the local councils, the town hall tyrants are a well-known scourge of this country, but it turns out that they're worse than ever, handing out a record number of fines for ASBOs, antisocial behaviour, but it's for things like sitting on the pavement, not having a tidy garden, feeding a stray cat. That was a particular favourite. What is going on here, Paddy? Why are they doing this to us?
Well, I mean, obviously, this is getting completely out of control. I mean, many people have become more conscious of these problems during coronavirus, but actually, this is a trend that's been growing for quite a while. So last year, we had record numbers of community protection notices given out, nearly 9,000. And that was in the absence of even a virus, which is being used now as an excuse to police our lives. Mm. I think there's a very low view of the general public, basically, is what's informing these things. Yeah. The fact that there's a belief that the public don't know how to behave, they can't be trusted to make the right decisions. And actually, it's ironic, really, that what are supposed to be rules to manage antisocial behavior are actually rules managing social behavior. So now we're basically being told we shouldn't socialize, we shouldn't go out, we shouldn't do things. You mentioned the man who went out and painted a fountain. I mean, this guy's a 71-year-old pensioner. He's probably spent, like many older people in our society, the last 6 months being told that if he leaves the house, he's probably going to die. And maybe he thought, I'll just get a bit of sunlight, go outside and do something for the community. And he's now been punished for that. So really, I think that just sums up the absurdity of it.
I think it all feeds into the fact, as you say, it's just as bad at national government level, but at local government level, it's clearly running rampant. This is general assumption by those who feel they are in authority that they have the right to do virtually anything to us. I mean, what on earth is going on when council officials turn up and fine people for feeding birds or stray cats in their own gardens? What on earth is that all about?
Well, exactly, and I think many people, more and more people, particularly with recent restrictions, are asking those questions, and there's been no explanation given by the authorities as to why they do these things. In many cases, we're seeing fines given out on the spot with very little evidence having to be provided, and almost no appeal process available for those people to challenge the decision to give them that fine. So you basically do get a situation where there is no accountability to the way that the rules are being implemented. And actually, should we even be trusting the authorities to know the rules that they've made? I mean, if we look, for example, at restrictions on actions due to coronavirus, the Coronavirus Act has never been lawfully used to convict someone or to give someone a fine. I mean, that's astonishing. So the police don't even know what they're doing. If the police don't know what they're doing, then really, I don't think we should be trusting busybody local councillors and jobsworths in the community who like to snitch on their neighbours to make decisions for us.
I think there's a sort of general syndrome going on here, but at individual level, I think it feeds into that suspicion. If you give someone a high-vis jacket and some sort of ID that they can flash at people and give them a small amount of authority, they will always end up pretty swiftly abusing it. The local government association defends its powers in this area as one of a number of ways council can tackle persistent antisocial behaviour problems, and they're talking about public drinking, racing in cars, intimidating behaviour, actions that can only ruin people's quality of life, harm business, or mean people are scared to visit public places. That's all fine and dandy, but when they're stopping people feeding birds in their own gardens and giving them fines for sitting on pavements, this is the problem. So my question really, Paddy, is why don't the town hall bosses tell their high-vis jacket jobsworth that there's a limit to what they ought to be fining people for, and to be sensible, because they're handing out many fines that are not sensible. You can't fine people for having an untidy lawn, can you? Well, I mean, they can, but you shouldn't be able to.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's astonishing to think that that is happening, but it is happening, and it's actually quite common that messy gardens are getting people in trouble. I mean, there was one case where it wasn't even the fact it was messy; it was just the style of the garden that wasn't very popular with a neighbour, and that got the guy given a warning. Um, yeah, I mean, there's a situation where I think authorities are running scared. They think this is what people want. We've seen this with coronavirus. There's an expectation that they need to be seen to be acting, and whatever action they take is better than not acting at all, which is completely in contradiction to some of the most basic principles of the way that the government should be acting, which is to, it should only really be interfering in our lives when it's absolutely clear that it is necessary. That's not what's going on. That's not what we're seeing. And I think the government, if it wants to be sort of reflective of how people feel, how people think the rules should be applied, then it needs to be actually talking to people, going out into communities rather than just slapping fines on people.
We're going to be talking about the national government's penchant for diktats in a minute, but I do feel that as they announce new lockdowns right now across the north, millions of people to face new strictures. We're already all suffering the rule of six. They're talking about curfews coming in. Why can't this government accept that British people are pretty sensible? If, like they did in Sweden, they said to us, look after your own interests, be sensible, look after your own health and safety concerns, that it would probably work. They don't trust us, do they? The people in authority do not trust the people in Britain, and we're talking about national and local level here, to be masters of their own domain, and I think that they ought to.
Absolutely. I think it's a great shame as well, considering that this government was elected with a huge democratic mandate, and it is now basically turning its back on accountability and the democratic process, both in the way that it's enforcing the laws, but also the way that the laws are being brought about with often very little scrutiny in Parliament. Yeah, generally it's just a very concerning situation. Particularly, I think that the reason that one of the main reasons the government is becomes so sort of incapable of seeing, well, it can't see the wood for the trees, basically, is because it went into a lockdown policy at the start of the pandemic because it panicked. It got some rather concerning modelling, which has turned out to be pretty inaccurate, and it acted on that in a way that was gave some of the most severe restrictions we've ever seen in modern British history. It's gone so far in now that it can't get out. It spent months terrifying everyone, saying that if we went outside, we would, be at risk of killing the elderly, all these sorts of things. And now they are saying, oh, well, actually, everyone should go back to work. Oh, but actually, we're not sure what we should do. Maybe we should lock down parts of the country and not other parts. They don't know what they're doing, basically. They've got no exit strategy. And they should really, really have had an exit strategy before they went into this, the first lockdown. And that is just, it's negligence on an almost criminal scale.
I mean, I'm going to ask you this, Paddy, because I ask everyone this, be they members of the public, be they politicians, be they commentators like yourself. Where does the government think it is heading with all this? What is the end game?
To be honest, I don't think it has any clue. I mean, Matt Hancock, I think this morning, said the government would keep trying to control coronavirus until such time as a vaccine or new treatments arrive. I mean, that could be a very long time, but a vaccine is also not a panacea. I mean, if we look at the flu, for example, we have to do a new vaccine for flu every year. Mm-hmm. So might we have to do a new vaccine for coronavirus every year? Are we going to have to go into lockdown every year because there's a new strain of coronavirus coming out? Mm-hmm. The government does not have a plan. It's got no strategy. And you can see that with the illogical and contradictory measures it's putting out. It's saying households shouldn't mix, but they can go into pubs where there's 50 people. And just quickly, I think you're right to bring up Sweden, because Sweden got a lot of flack for trusting its people, basically. Mm-hmm. And Sweden, whilst Britain has been lowering the limit on the groups the size of a group you can meet in from 50 to 6 people, Sweden has changed its limit from 50 to 500 people. So I think that just goes to show that when you do trust people, sometimes that has the best outcomes.
By the way, the crowd limit in France is 1,000. It's
Well, there you
1,000.
go.
And we've got 6. You're right. I mean, I think a lot of people in this country now think Sweden right, Britain wrong, and our people will not, Boris and the gang will not admit to themselves that they got outflanked by a country that went the right route, and we didn't go the right route, but we seem to be locked into an increasing illogical madness, and I don't see how they feel that even if a vaccine comes along, which will take, I think, by all accounts, at least a year, at least, even if a vaccine comes along, as you say, it's not necessarily the cure, because there are actually estimates that as many as 20% of Brits on the anti-vax wave will refuse to have that vaccine, and therefore it will not stamp out COVID. So Boris's COVID zero policy is just a fantasy, isn't it?
It's nuts. It's totally nuts, and it's bizarre because the government seems to be looking at what other countries are doing badly and then copying that rather than copying the good things that countries are doing. So instead of going for an approach like Sweden, we've ended up doing this, trying to do a COVID zero strategy, which is like what they have in New Zealand, where they've had almost no deaths throughout the entire coronavirus outbreak, but not because they've been strict, but just because it's a small country with a small population. But they've got some of the strictest measures. We've seen the same thing in Australia. In Australia right now, you have to get permission to leave the country. I mean, we've not done that yet in the UK, but
it's coming. Don't worry.
It'll
You
have
come.
to be worried about what the next measure will be, because at least there was a time when you might have thought, well, the government's got some logic. It thinks it knows what it's doing. Now, I don't think it even believes that it knows what it's doing. It's just become so reactive and so responsive rather than proactive that it's completely lost the plot.
Just before you go, Paddy, do you think that disconcertingly, both the national government and local governments, there's a certain relish they take in being able to hand out these rules, regulations, orders and diktats? And Matt Hancock certainly seems to revel in it.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, and it's also, the problem is there's people members of the public as well who are participating in this. I mean, I'm sure it's a very small minority, but we saw this during the peak of lockdown when, the hotlines for snitching on your neighbours were overwhelmed with calls, which was a ridiculous situation to have, because, you could just see your neighbour doing something you don't like and just dob them in because you don't like your neighbour. And that was just a way of getting at people. But yes, totally. I mean, they wouldn't be doing this unless they enjoyed it and they found some sort of, I think you're right earlier to mention that, some people just like having the high-vis jacket and being able to go around and tell people how they should be behaving.
Yeah.
Seeing police cars driving around on the grass at parks when they don't need to be there.
Yeah,
this is what happens when you give significant powers to unaccountable bodies. They will go beyond those powers if you leave any ambiguity about what they should be doing.
Every single time. Paddy, good to talk. Thank you so much. That's Paddy Hannam there. He's a writer at Spiked Online, and he's also a former Brexit Party parliamentary candidate.